two superstar authors locked in a legal battle over allegations of copyright infringement. An unknown writer claiming that a blockbuster series was based around ideas stolen from her. An author in a niche category going after a competitor for daring to write in the same subgenre. Throughout the last few years, some of the highest profile plagiarism lawsuits in the literary world have come from one particular corner of the fiction space: paranormal romance, or something adjacent to it. Paranormal romance is a subgenre of romance that involves fantastical elements and supernatural beings, such as vampires, werewolves, and ghosts. So what is it about this genre that makes it so prone to copyright lawsuits? My name is Ellie Blackwood. I'm a sci-fi and fantasy writer in progress, and today we're going to dive into some of paranormal romance's most scandalous plagiarism lawsuits and see if we can get to the bottom of this. I want to be super clear, I am not a lawyer, and this video is not accusing anyone of plagiarism or defamation. All of the accusations I'll be detailing here are alleged, but I'm not so much interested in whether the parties in these lawsuits are innocent or guilty. Rather, I'm interested in why the accusations were made in the first place. Aside from the fact that they're all related to paranormal romance books, the plagiarism accusations I'm going to be detailing here have another big thing in common. They all mostly involve allegations of copying themes, plots, and tropes, rather than copying specific passages. There have been some high-profile cases of plagiarism where an author straight up copied someone else's sentences into their own writing. Such as when literary writer Jumi Bello had her debut novel cancelled by the publisher in 2022 because an estimated 30% of the novel had been lifted from other works. Or when romance author Christiane Cerullo was caught copying over 100 passages from other writers, earning her the nickname Copy-Paste Chris. But plagiarism related to ideas and tropes is way harder to prove in a court of law because you need to show that the execution of the idea is substantially similar. You can't copyright ideas, you can only copyright your expression of an idea. You also have to prove that the person you're accusing of plagiarism actually had access to your work and therefore could have copied it on purpose. As unlikely as it may seem, sometimes people just happen to come up with similar concepts. I've definitely had a couple of instances where I come across a story that sounds really close to something I've written and had the knee-jerk reaction of, wait, that's my thing. But in every case, it's impossible for the other author to have copied me because I'm not published yet and only my critique partners and beta readers have ever read my stuff. Another wrinkle is that fiction genres have a lot of common tropes and storylines that you just expect to see. For example, there are a million fantasy books about a band of characters going on an epic quest to retrieve a magical artifact, so if you're a fantasy author who wrote a story with that plot, you can't win a lawsuit against another fantasy author who also wrote that kind of plot because it's a staple of the fantasy genre. And these tropes can get incredibly specific the more you niche down into particular subgenres, as we will come to see. The ultimate point of this video is to develop a theory about why the paranormal romance genre has so many lawsuits, but I really want to hear what you think, so be sure to leave your thoughts about everything I'm going to discuss here in the comments. If you like video essays about books, science fiction, fantasy, Doctor Who, and all that goodness, be sure to subscribe to my channel. And be sure to subscribe to my free monthly newsletter to get access to all my YouTube videos 3 days before anyone else and to keep up with all my latest projects and content. You can find that linked in the description. Now let's dive in with our first case study, the time that young adult fantasy superstar Cassandra Clare was accused of ripping her story straight from another best-selling author's pages. Sherrilyn Kenyon is a major author of paranormal romance, and one of her best-loved series is called Dark Hunters. Kenyon began publishing short stories in the Dark Hunters world in the mid-1980s, but beginning in 2002, she turned it into a novel series that now spans over 30 books. The Dark Hunters series was hugely popular in the early 2000s, helping to fuel the paranormal fantasy romance boom that also brought us books like Twilight. Another series that came out of this paranormal fantasy craze was the Shadowhunter Chronicles by Cassandra Clare. Shadowhunters is still a wildly popular young adult fantasy series, with 17 novels out and several more on the way, and it was adapted into both a 2013 movie and a 3-season TV show that ran from 2016 till 2019. The first Shadowhunters novel, City of Bones, which is part of the initial 6-book Mortal Instruments series, was released in 2007. Now, you might think that the names Dark Hunters and Shadowhunters sound kind of similar. Sherrilyn Kenyon apparently thought so too, because in 2016 she filed a sweeping lawsuit against Cassandra Clare, accusing her of trademark and copyright infringement. Kenyon's lawsuit stated, "In 2006, plaintiff was alerted by some of her distressed fans of the potential publication by Clare of a work that incorporated plaintiff's Dark Hunter marks. Plaintiff demanded that the term Dark Hunter and the Dark Hunter marks be removed from Clare's work. Clare removed the term Dark Hunter and the Dark Hunter marks from her work, substituting instead the term Shadow Hunters for her protagonist, but removing any reference to Hunter, whether Shadow or Dark, from the title. The book was published in 2007 as The Mortal Instruments, City of Bones." Despite plaintiff's continuing protests and continuous assurances from Clare and Clare's publisher that she/they would not expand the use of the Shadowhunters term or adopt it as a trademark, Clare has persisted over time in expanding her use of the term Shadowhunters from a mere description of her protagonists. First to a tagline on the cover of her works, and eventually to a complete rebranding of her works so as to be confusingly similar to the Dark Hunter series. Clare claimed that she had never read Kenyon's books, had never been in contact with Kenyon before the 2016 lawsuit, and certainly had never promised Kenyon that she wouldn't use the term Shadowhunter as part of her brand. Indeed, from what I could tell, Kenyon's lawsuit doesn't include any evidence to back up her narrative that she reached out to Clare before 2016. Like, there's no quotations from emails or anything like that. Clare's friend and writing partner, best-selling fantasy author Holly Black, told a reporter from Slate that Clare did originally use the name Dark Hunters in an early draft and proposal for City of Bones in 2006. However, when Black found one of Kenyon's books at a trade show with the word Dark Hunters trademarked on the cover, she alerted Clare, who switched to using Shadowhunters for the version that actually made it to print. Beyond that, Kenyon submitted an enormous list of plotlines, characters, and tropes that she claimed were similar between the Dark Hunters and Shadowhunters series. For example, Kenyon's complaint said, "In both series, a young person becomes part of the Dark Hunters or Shadowhunters world after being saved by a gorgeous blonde Dark Hunter or Shadowhunter. The protagonists learn their purpose and how to fight various demons and their own personal inadequacies while dealing with intricate family and friend issues." In Clare's rebuttal, her legal team wrote, "Other than two characters both being blonde, this describes the traditional hero's journey that represents almost all fantasy and adventure fiction, folklore, and mythology ever written. It is so fundamental to humanity that we cannot successfully trace its origin, as it appears to have begun before written history. It does not originate with Kenyon's Dark Hunters series." Kenyon's complaint also pointed out, "Both series feature mortal or normal objects, referred to as instruments by the defendant, including without limitation a cup, a sword, and a mirror, each imbued with magical properties to help battle evil and protect mankind. Both Dark Hunters and Shadow Hunters have enchanted swords that are divinely forged, imbued with otherworldly spirits, have unique names, and glow like heavenly fire." Clare's response read, "This too is self-evidently part of our shared human folkloric and mythological tradition. A quick glance at even something as unofficial as Wikipedia's article List of Magical Weapons will quickly indicate several hundred, quote, normal objects imbued with magical properties to help battle evil and protect mankind from mythological traditions all over the world and throughout the history of fiction. It is laughable to imagine Clare as having stolen from Kenyon the idea of a magic sword or a magic mirror. Glowing and named swords can be found throughout literature and folklore and do not originate with Kenyon." Of the setting of the two series, Kenyon's filing said, "Both works take place in an urban world that is not what it seems. Theirs is a world behind the veil, with portals that lead to heaven realms and hell realms. There are segregated wards used as walls to hold back demons, and neutral grounds that are safe zones. Different dimensions exist. Supernatural beings break through to the world of man. These worlds are not readily accessible to mortals." Clare's legal response, taking on an increasingly exasperated tone, was as follows. "This statement is mostly true of both series, as it is true of thousands of fantastical stories and legends throughout history. In general, this describes the setting of the genre known as urban fantasy, and involves story elements going back to the birth of fantastical fiction. These ideas were obviously not created by Sherrilyn Kenyon in 2002. The above description also accurately describes the TV show Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which aired from from March 1997 to May 2003. It would be equally ridiculous for the creators of that show to claim they invented its world-building elements and storytelling tropes, and they have been wise enough not to do so. That Kenyon has done so in this suit represents a solipsistic view of human storytelling, fantastical fiction, and the archetypes that make up our mythological and folkloric traditions that is truly astonishing to behold. Clare's rebuttal also pointed out that she had turned in the drafts for the first 3 books of the Mortal Instruments series to her publisher by the end of 2007. And yet, Kenyon's lawsuit accused her of copying many elements that were only present in Dark Hunter's books published after 2007. Additionally, some of Kenyon's claims about specific character similarities just weren't accurate. For example, Kenyon claimed that a character from Clare's City of Glass, Amatis Greymark, was a ripoff of her Dark Hunter's character Nicolette Peltier, but a lot of the proof Kenyon listed in her court filing revolved around Amatis being a shapeshifter, which she is not. Kenyon also claimed that both her character Nick Gautier and Clare's character Clary Frey have a demon father, even though Clary's father isn't a demon. In May of 2016, about 4 months after she filed the lawsuit, Kenyon revised her complaint to drop all the copyright infringement charges, leaving only the trademark claims. Copyright infringement concerns the actual text of the book, whereas trademark infringement is about the branding and packaging of the book, which is normally decided by the publisher rather than the author. The trademark claims were partially based around an incident from 2009, where Clare's publisher redesigned the cover of City of Bones to include a blurb from Stephanie Meyer, and the new design accidentally wrote the word Dark Hunters on the back cover instead of Shadow Hunters. When the printing error was discovered, Clare's response said, the publisher destroyed all the copies of the book that were still in the warehouse, attempted to reach out to Kenyon to apologize, and made it clear that the misprint wasn't Clare's fault. Kenyon's trademark claim also included an allegation that the angelic power rune from the Shadowhunters books, which is used prominently on marketing materials for the series, was too similar to a Dark Hunter mark that she had created for her books. In her motion to dismiss, Clare argued that Kenyon hadn't used the Dark Hunter mark on her branding enough for the superficial similarities between the symbols to cause confusion. And, crucially, that Clare owns the trademark registration for her rune, but Kenyon had not filed a registration for her Dark Hunter mark. Clare did end up settling with Kenyon over the trademark allegations in May 2018. In a post on her Tumblr, Clare explained, I had many misgivings about settling. I did not and do not now think that Ms. Kenyon's trademark was ever infringed on, and I certainly know I and my publisher were never part of a conspiracy to harm or defraud her. None of us were even familiar with her books. In the end, in these situations, you settle a lawsuit because being sued is hellish. Yes, it is expensive, but it is also grinding and miserable. In 2019, Kenyon filed a lawsuit against her ex-husband, claiming that he had tried to poison her, and she said in an interview with Vulture that year that her husband was the one who had pressured her into going after Clare. She later dropped the lawsuit against him, and her ex-husband denied all the allegations and countersued for defamation. In 2025, a judge ruled in favor of his defamation claim and barred Kenyon from publicly claiming that her ex tried to poison her. As a side note, it is true that Clare was banned from fanfiction.net in 2001 after being accused of plagiarizing other fantasy media in her fanfiction, but there is no evidence that Clare ever plagiarized in her published works that she sold for money. Putting aside the claims against Clare that involved factual inaccuracies about her stories, or the accusation that she somehow plagiarized a book that she had no access to at the time of writing The Mortal Instruments, I think Kenyon's allegations reveal something really interesting about this subgenre of paranormal fantasy romance. As Clare's legal responses pointed out, a lot of common fantasy tropes stem from hundreds of years of mythology and folklore. But more than that, the specific ways in which these mythological influences can manifest in particular subgenres, such as paranormal romance and urban fantasy, can lead to even more similarities between works. Like, of course your warrior who battles the forces of evil is going to be a hot brooding guy with tattoos and a leather jacket, because that's just what readers want from this kind of story. But was this just a one-off incident from a copyright lawsuit that was maybe a bit trigger-happy, or is this a more widespread phenomenon? To answer that question, let's look at another more recent lawsuit that might have a bit more bite. In 2021, an unpublished writer and family law attorney named Lynne Freeman was browsing in a bookstore when she happened upon a particular book that caught her eye. Crave by Tracy Wolff, published by a press called Entangled Publishing, was a young adult paranormal fantasy romance about a girl named Grace who attends an academy for supernatural beings. Wolff was a seasoned romance and urban fantasy writer who had published over 60 books, but the Crave series was by far her most popular work, catapulting her to the top of bestseller lists and selling millions of copies worldwide. As she read, Freeman was shocked to find what she felt were some striking similarities to a YA paranormal romance manuscript that she wrote in 2010 called Blue Moon Rising. Freeman had revised that manuscript over and over again with her agent at the time, Emily Sylvan Kim, and estimated she had produced at least 40 different versions of the story in the process. Kim had submitted the manuscript to several publishers, including Entangled, but all of them ultimately passed, and Kim dropped Freeman as a client in 2014. So Blue Moon Rising was never published, and only a handful of people ever saw it, but the suspicious part was who exactly those people were. It turns out Emily Sylvan Kim was also Tracy Wolff's agent. Furthermore, given that Blue Moon Rising was at one point submitted to Entangled Publishing, Freeman suspected that the publisher may have had a part in stealing her ideas. In March 2022, Freeman filed a copyright infringement lawsuit against Wolff, Kim, and Entangled Publishing. The whole debacle was covered in a 2025 article in The New Yorker. Behind the scenes, the Crave series was something of a co-creation between Wolff and the Entangled CEO and publisher Liz Pelletier. In 2019, Pelletier began thinking that she wanted to publish a vampire paranormal romance story that would be Twilight for the new generation, so Entangled Publishing approached Wolff wanting to work with her. Wolff delivered 5 pitches, including a story that involved, to quote The New Yorker, a sexy, degenerate teenage monster and a straight-laced scholarship student. Wolff and Pelletier worked together to turn that pitch idea into a fleshed-out story, and Wolff set about writing Crave. Most traditional publishers take a year or more in between releases in a series, but Entangled was eager to speed up their timeline for the Crave series. Romantasy, that is, romance stories set in a fantasy world, is everywhere nowadays, but for many years it was only really a thing in the self-published space. The most successful indie authors often take advantage of the flexibility that self-publishing gives them in order to crank out loads of books in a series only a few months apart. This strategy especially pays off in romance spaces because romance readers are voracious. So when traditional publishers started picking up romantasy stories around COVID time, some of them, like Entangled, wanted to speed up their timelines to compete with self-published successes and feed their hungry readers. Crave came out in April 2020, the sequel Crush came out in September 2020, the third book, Covet, followed in March 2021, and so on. This meant that even though Wolff's name was on the cover, the Crave series was often more of a collaboration between Wolff and Pelletier, and sometimes, Freeman alleges, Kim. According to the New Yorker article, in the hectic days and hours before a book deadline, an already collaborative creative process could become an all-out emergency. It was sometimes hard to tell who added what. Love, our tree of trust is just a twig. Did you write that? Kim texted Pelletier about a line in the second book, Crush. Referring to a different line, Pelletier said, I wrote that sentence, but I was using Tracy's voice. And I came up with every header but the first chapter, lol. While closing the fourth book, Court, which was on a particularly tight schedule, author, editor, and agent supplied sentences and ideas, all of which swirled together in the various documents being updated in tandem on each of their laptops. Pelletier asked Kim, Tracy wrote that Moonstone description? Kim texted Entangled editor Stacey Abrams, Tracy and I are team speedwriting new scenes, and I've stopped copy editing because I helped write all this. The defense said that Kim's contribution, quote, was extremely limited and was entirely technical. This information was mainly relevant in the lawsuit because it would help Freeman's case if she could establish that Kim, who had indisputably read multiple versions of the Blue Moon Rising manuscript, could have inserted some ideas from that book into the Crave series. But as a reader, it's super interesting to see how one publisher is going about creating highly commercial works in a popular genre, even though Entangled does accept completed manuscript submissions directly from authors as well. In a statement in the New Yorker article, Pelletier said, unlike some other traditional publishers, Entangled tends to work more with its authors at the ideation stage to try to organically bake in a high concept. I would assume that books produced in this way are tightly tuned to the most popular tropes in their genre. Wolff and Pelletier deny that they ever read Blue Moon Rising, and the two books are quite different in several ways. The New Yorker article describes the differences by saying, Wolff's story is sassy, fun, commercial, and hot. Freeman's is raw, ruminative, interior. What is strange and spiky in one is palatable and familiar in the other. But Freeman pointed to several elements common to both stories that she felt could not be there by accident. In her lawsuit, Freeman Freeman included a description that she claims applies to both books. A young adult paranormal fantasy romance set in high school in Alaska, with a protagonist who moves to the state from San Diego after a tragic accident killed her family. The story follows a teenage girl who believes she's human, but is not, and who must navigate her way in the supernatural world she never knew existed, while falling in love with a dangerous boy with dark secrets, all set against the backdrop of a supernatural war between the factions of beings. The story offers a feminist perspective in which the heroine is a wholly unique supernatural being, whose very purpose is to restore the balance among the warring factions, with a unique fantasy world set in Alaska. On the face of it, it seems like these stories are so similar that this can't be a coincidence. But a lot of these plot points are very common paranormal romance tropes, such as the heroine discovering a paranormal world at war, falling in love with a dangerous brooding boy, and discovering she's actually a unique supernatural being with otherworldly powers. This description also glosses over some pretty big differences between the books, such as the fact that Crave is set in an academy for supernatural beings and Blue Moon Rising is set in a normal public high school. The detail about the heroine moving from San Diego to Alaska does seem oddly specific, but according to the New Yorker article, the Alaskan setting, which Freeman saw as her intellectual property, is surprisingly common. Pelletier estimates that about 95% of vampire novels take place in Alaska, New Orleans, or Las Vegas. Freeman's complaint also listed a huge number of plot elements, scenes, and quotes that she claimed were substantially similar to the text of her manuscript. Many of these elements are, again, common paranormal romance tropes, such as the heroine obsessing over and being drawn to the romantic lead, the main couple having a mating bond or soul connection, and the romantic lead laying the heroine on a bed and tending to her when she gets injured. However, others are a bit more specific, such as how both romantic leads have mind control powers, both protagonists compare Alaska to living on the moon, and the love interests are described as smelling kind of similar. As far as the actual quotes and scenes that Freeman provides in her legal complaint, your mileage may vary in terms of how convincing you find them as evidence of plagiarism. The complaint's description of the scene where the heroine and the love interest first meet in both books includes the love interest being dressed in a black t-shirt and jeans, the heroine sensing something different about him, and the heroine being angry about the entrancing and overwhelming effect he has on her, which are arguably common tropes for a first meeting with a brooding bad boy love interest in a paranormal romance. Some of the direct quotes offered as evidence of plagiarism include, "I don't believe in coincidences," "My eyes bugged out of my head," "Waiting for the other shoe to drop," and "Well, well, well." Courtney Milan, a historical romance author who used to practice IP law, weighed in on the lawsuit by tweeting, "The fact that both authors use commonly used phrases does not indicate anything except that they are writing contemporary dialogue. The premise of this lawsuit defies my ability to believe. Why on earth would someone go through someone else's book and copy only the cliches? Make it make sense." At the time when I initially filmed this video, this case was ongoing, but as I was putting what I thought were the final touches on the edit, we got a massive update. On March 16th, 2026, the court granted summary judgment in favor of the defendants, ruling that Crave was not plagiarized and Wolff, Kim, and Entangled Publishing were innocent. In making this ruling, Judge Colleen McMahon said it didn't matter whether the team behind the Crave series had some kind of access to the drafts of Blue Moon Rising because she didn't think the works were substantially similar in the first place. McMahon wrote, "There are unquestionably similarities between the plots of Crave and Blue Moon Rising, but those similarities relate to uncontested tropes/sans affaire that are the staple of this literary genre and of fantasy fiction writ more broadly. When we delve into the detailed expression of those tropes, the similarities fall away. For example, Freeman suggests that while dead parents is a trope, Wolff copied her expression, because in both books the death of the heroine's parents is, quote, accidental, vehicular, and violent, leaving the protagonist with physical and psychological scars. But this argument is not supported by the works themselves. In Blue Moon Rising, Anna/Mia's father Dante died a decade before the story begins, either in an elevator accident or a plane crash depending on the manuscript. He later turned out to be alive, albeit enchanted, having not perished in any sort of accident, but rather being imprisoned by an evil demon. Grace's parents in Crave, on the other hand, died in a car accident a month earlier and are dead. So, while both Anna/Mia's father and Grace's parents supposedly came to grief in a, quote, vehicle, the similarities end there. A car accident is not the same thing as an elevator or airplane crash. A live but enchanted parent is not the same thing as two dead ones. And children are generally traumatized when a parent dies. suffering physical and psychological scars is hardly uncommon or copyrightable. As far as the long list of specific line-level similarities in Freeman's complaint, the judge said, "Virtually all of the similarities Freeman identifies in these lists are either tropes/sans affaire, similarities based on the shared use of ordinary words and common phrases, or trivial details that have no bearing on the total concept and overall feel of the works. Freeman's lists, for example, include such things as both works mentioning Hawaii and both heroines grabbing an apple between classes, as well as the fact that both novels featured the phrase well, well, well. Even the actual similarities identified by Freeman are nothing more than specific bits and pieces found here and there in works of extended length. Almost 3,000 printed pages of Crave novels and 5 separate drafts of Freeman's novel, which spans 400 to 500 typewritten pages. Given the genre and the target audience, it should not be surprising to find a little something here and a tiny reference there that are similar, like the heroines comparing Alaska's landscape to the moon or wondering if the romantic lead could be an alien. But that is not the measure of substantial similarity. One measures substantial similarity with reference to the overall look and feel of the works, not discrete bits and pieces of text. The judge also pointed to the expansive world and adventures of the overall Crave series as evidence against Freeman's claims, saying, "Whatever discrete similarities there might be between the plot of Blue Moon Rising and the first volume of Crave, any suggestion of substantial similarity evaporates entirely when we move on to the second, third, and fourth volumes of the Crave series." Overall, Judge McMahon said, "After considering the works as a whole, and I again emphasize that the court has read every word of the allegedly infringed and infringing works, no reasonable fact finder could conclude that their plots are substantially similar. The total concept and feel of Blue Moon Rising and Crave are vastly different in substance, style, structure, length, tone, and mood. They engender very different visceral responses from their readers. As a matter of law, they are not substantially similar." I will link the ruling in the video description just in case you want to read the whole thing for yourself. There is some litigation in this saga that is still ongoing as of recording this video, because in 2025, Freeman also filed a separate plagiarism lawsuit regarding the 5th and 6th Crave novels, which had been published after she filed her first lawsuit. But the ruling in this initial case is certainly a big blow to Freeman's chances of victory, and it might mean that the rest of the litigation could be resolved fairly quickly in favor of Wolff and her team. Now let's look at another lawsuit that might be the most bonkers one of all. In 2018, Addison Cain, the author of the erotic romance novel Born to be Bound, was outraged when she learned of a book called Crave to Conquer by Zoey Ellis. The two books contained a striking number of similarities. According to a New York Times article about the situation, in both books, alpha men are overpowered by the scent of omega heroines and take them hostage. In both books, the women try and fail to suppress their pheromones and give in to the urge to mate. In both books, the couple sniff, purr, and growl, nest in den-like enclosures, neck bite to leave claim marks, and experience something called knotting, involving a peculiar feature of the Wolff phallus. To the uninitiated, this odd list of parallels makes Ellis look mighty suspicious, but in reality both authors were drawing from a subgenre that developed in fanfiction spaces known as ABO, or Omegaverse. The constellation of tropes that make up the Omegaverse first developed around 2011 in fanfiction about the TV show Supernatural, and it spread to other fandoms from there. Omegaverse stories take place in an alternate universe where the characters are sorted into 3 distinct biological categories: the dominating alphas, the normal betas, and the submissive omegas. Alpha and omega characters undergo hormone cycles that give them the uncontrollable urge to procreate with each other. Male characters can get pregnant, and there are some interesting anatomical features involved. As the Omegaverse genre blew up in fanfiction spaces, some authors decided to publish fiction featuring original characters that still fell within the Omegaverse framework. Cain and Ellis were 2 such authors. Even though Omegaverse is a subgenre of speculative erotic romance, its unique origin in fanfic spaces makes me hesitant to declare that Omegaverse stories are by definition paranormal romance. However, Omegaverse stories often involve werewolves, vampires, and other supernatural creatures. And Omegaverse tropes are sometimes woven into mainstream paranormal romance, romantasy, and urban fantasy, such as with Ali Hazelwood's popular Bride and Mate novels. Indeed, Ellis's Crave to Conquer series has more recently been rebranded to look more like your typical dark romantasy story. So there is some overlap there. While Cain didn't claim to have invented Omegaverse in general, my understanding is that she did claim to be the first to publish original heterosexual Omegaverse stories like Ellis's book. Traditionally, most Omegaverse stories involved male-male couples. However, Cain probably wasn't the first writer to publish original heterosexual Omegaverse fiction, and even if she was, it's unlikely she would be able to claim copyright over it because you can't copyright an idea, only a particular expression of that idea. Nonetheless, Cain alerted her publisher to Ellis's book, and the publisher sent a bunch of copyright takedown notices to online retailers that carried Crave to Conquer. Suddenly finding her books vanished from online storefronts, Ellis and her publisher sued Cain and her publisher for defamation and for filing false copyright infringement notices. The winding legal shenanigans that ensued were summed up in a video essay from Lindsay Ellis, no relation to Zoey Ellis, in 2020. After Lindsay's video was published, Cain actually threatened Lindsay with legal action and tried to get the video removed via a bunch of copyright takedown notices too, so that gives you an idea of just how messy this whole thing got. But while the Lindsay Ellis video essay is a fascinating deep dive into fanfiction IP law and weaponized copyright takedown notices, I want to focus on exactly what aspects Cain claimed Zoey Ellis had copied from her. Cain's and Ellis's novels had entirely different settings. Cain's was based in a futuristic dystopian world, and Ellis's was based in a fantasy world with magic. But Cain's copyright notices claimed that other aspects of the stories were way too similar. In June 2018, when Ellis's camp had not yet filed their lawsuit but was still trying to get Cain and her publisher to retract the copyright takedown notices, Ellis's lawyer sent a letter to Cain's publisher with responses to 31 supposed similarities between the books that Cain's publisher had identified. This list is a pretty telling look at the substance of the allegations. In both books, the female main character, who is an Omega, suppresses her hormones and pretends to be a Beta, using drugs to achieve this in Cain's book and magic to achieve this in Ellis's book. In response to the allegation that Ellis copied this plot point from Cain, Ellis's lawyer called it a heavily used Omegaverse trope. Omegas use drugs to hide their dynamic or suppress their heat. There are hundreds of published and free books regarding Omegas handling this part of their characteristic in this way. However, use of magic is unusual and unique to Ellis's world. Very few Omegaverse books use magic and Omegas in the way it has been used by Miss Ellis. Cain's publisher also pointed to the specific scene where the heroines discover their suppressants have failed as evidence of plagiarism. The quote from Born to be Bound is as follows: "Sucking in a ragged breath, swaying as if her legs could not decide which way to run, Clare whispered under her breath, 'No, no, this can't be happening.'" And from Crave to Conquer, "No," Kaylin whispered, taking a step back. "No, it can't." Ellis's lawyer responded, "Failing suppressants is an Omegaverse trope. Shock and disbelief at this happening will likely include the word no." Another similarity that Cain's publisher claimed is that the alpha hero undresses in front of the Omega heroine and says, quote, "You are fighting your cycle," in Born to be Bound, or, quote, "You fight your instincts," in Crave to Conquer. Ellis's lawyer responded, "Omegaverse trope and a logical plot point if the Omega has gone into heat against her will. Furthermore, the act of a male undressing in front of a female is not unique to Ms. Cain and is presently in millions of stories." The publisher also listed the similarity of the Alpha being obsessed with the Omega and demanding that she obey him despite her vocal rejection of them being together. Ellis's lawyer wrote, "This is common in Omegaverse paranormal romance and dark romance. An idea of vocal rejection is not unique to Ms. Cain's universe, and is an integral element of the dark romance genre also. Clearly, obsession the concept in a dark romance cannot be copyrighted." Overall, Ellis's lawyer said, "Out of these 31 alleged similarities, 8 are tropes of the Omegaverse standard expectations, which are well documented online in different forums and in no way are novel or unique to Miss Cain's work. Then 11 more are presented in a misleading way that ignores the context, logic, and circumstances in fact that make them different. Finally, and more egregiously, 12 are outright false statements made about the story of Crave to Conquer." While this legal battle didn't stop with the copyright infringement claims, the infringement part of the lawsuit was actually settled in September 2019, when Cain's publisher extended an offer of judgment that, quote, "stipulates that Zoey Ellis's Myth of Omega series does not plagiarize Addison Cain's Alpha's Claim series, and the takedown notices transmitted pursuant to the Digital Millennium Copyright Act are invalid." So, according to the official court record at least, Zoey Ellis was totally innocent of copying Addison Cain's work. She was just writing in the same genre and using story elements typical of that genre. This incident follows the same familiar pattern that we see in all of our case studies, where common genre tropes are held up as evidence of copyright infringement. So now we have to answer the question, why does this keep happening in paranormal romance specifically? Given the case studies we've looked at today, I would like to present a hypothesis. I believe there are 3 compounding reasons for why the paranormal romance genre might be particularly prone to accusations of copyright infringement. First, paranormal romance is a niche subgenre with some surprisingly common tropes, settings, and plotlines. Broader fantasy and romance stories have common motifs too, of course. The epic quest, the enemies to lovers arc, the fake dating trope, the villain turning out to be the hero's father. But the more you niche down into subgenres like paranormal romance, the more specific these tropes can become. It's therefore unsurprising that authors in these subgenres might notice astounding similarities between their books and others, even when those similarities are completely innocent conventions of the stories they're writing. Second, paranormal romance is a speculative genre where in theory a wider variety of things can happen because magic and supernatural powers exist. While this doesn't negate my first point about the many common similarities in paranormal romance stories, the speculative nature of the genre may make authors more skeptical that any striking similarities happen by accident. After all, if you're writing in a world where anything could happen, what are the odds that 2 books might have such similar plots? The answer is, of course, that any genre, fantastical or not, develops conventions that can get more strict the more you niche down. And third, genre fiction like paranormal romance has the potential to create massive fan bases, which can raise the stakes for protecting your IP. While contemporary romance books are usually standalones or spin-offs, romance series with a paranormal or fantasy bent can balloon into dozens of books thanks to the sweeping fantastical worlds they inhabit. These series often build up huge, dedicated armies of fans who will vigorously defend their favorite stories. This may make authors more motivated to protect their literary empire, and it also may give them more confidence to go after rivals if they think their fans will back them up. Of course, this third point wouldn't apply to an author like Lynne Freeman from the Tracy Wolff case who hasn't been published yet, but my point is that it may be an additional risk factor. But all of this is just speculation, so I really want to hear from you. Please let me know in the comments what you think about all this. Do you think I'm onto something with my theories, or do you think I've got it all wrong? What do you think about all these lawsuits? Share all your thoughts in the comments, because I'm super excited to discuss. Subscribe to my channel for more video essays like this one, and be sure to subscribe to my monthly newsletter to make sure you never miss any of my hot takes and to get early access to all my videos. The link to that is in the description. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.